Would you like to start your own podcast? Or do you already have a podcast but wish you could focus more on recording great content and spend less time on all of the technical aspects? Fear the Beard Media wants to help you start a brand new podcast or maintain your existing feed absolutely free. When you join the Fear the Beard Media Podcast Network, we'll produce, post, and promote your podcast free of charge. That leaves more time for you to focus on what really matters: creating awesome audio content. If you're interested in joining the Fear the Beard Media Podcast Network, email us at fearthebeardmedia@gmail.com.
Football, the All-American game, is in fact a Canadian invention. The year was 1874, and the McGill University football team first implemented the modified rules of English rugby in a game with Harvard. The potent offense of today's game was not yet evident, and the game ended 0-0. In 1891, the Canadian Rugby Union was formed, followed by the birth of the Big Four, comprising teams from Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. Our modern-day game certainly has no monopoly on competitiveness.
Welcome to the Daily Fantasy CFL Podcast. I am your unknowledgeable as ever host, Gabriel Crazy Gaby Harbor. And here for the knowledge, and also because he's, the one who carries this whole damn thing, John Buffalo 66 Sullivan. John, what's going on today, man?
Hey, just keeping cool and getting ready for some CFL. It's going to be an exciting week, I think. Although it might be tough to top the exciting CFL games of last week. After a couple of clunkers, we had a few overtime games.
Yeah, I remember last week we talked about how the games really were sort of snooze fests, and you had told us before that you generally don't turn off the television before the fourth quarter or so on a CFL game, and there were some games that were just snoozers that were done by halftime even almost. So good to hear that we had some action for folks who are just getting acclimated to this new wonderful sport. And with that, I am just going to go ahead and throw it to you and ask, how did the recommendations you gave out on the podcast last week, how did they fare considering these games were so exciting and so high scoring?
Well, my opinions on the games themselves, and I have to remember I differentiate between actually wagering on a game
Absolutely.
and the daily fantasy aspect of it. But I think overall it all went pretty well. I say surprisingly because my DraftKings lineup I put out for all the listeners did decent. And the reason I say surprising is because I faded Chris Williams, who we'll talk about, as we've talked about him every week so far. But his performance was on the first night of games, and since I didn't have him, I said, oh, geez, I'm going to lose to everybody that does have him. And then on the second night, I had a Darius Bowman who put up almost an identical score to Chris Williams. And that, as far as cash games go, put me right back in the mix. And I had the top, with a top two scoring quarterback, a top two scoring running back. I had two of the four top scoring wide receivers in my DraftKings lineup last week. So it did good. Again, that was designed to be a cash play. It wasn't designed to be a GPP. So I think the perfect score in if you had if you had the perfect lineup, as they call it, would have scored about 220 points, which is quite a bit. When 170, less than 170 won in week one. So it was some outstanding performances last week, and I guess we can go through the games and talk about the important things that happened.
Absolutely.
And didn't happen.
Absolutely. We'll go through those in just a moment, but before we do, I want to remind all of our listeners that they can subscribe to the Daily Fantasy CFL Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or any other podcasting app that they use. Of course, they can also follow you on Twitter at Buffalo Hold'em, like Texas Hold'em, at Buffalo Hold'em, and they can ask you their lineup questions, anything about the CFL that they want to know. You are very responsive, very social with people, so I urge folks, if you're trying to do more than just enter lineups, you actually want to learn the game, get educated, John is a tremendous resource. You should definitely give him a follow on Twitter. Also, the Daily Fantasy CFL Podcast is posted on his YouTube channel. You can just search on YouTube to find that each week as well if you prefer that forum. And last but certainly not least, you can find the original post at fearthebeardmedia.com. That's where this all originates out of. And with that, John, we are going to talk about the Bombers taking on the Tiger Cats, which again, I'm still I'm still an adamant believer that the name is overkill and we need to shorten it to one of the two. The Tigers or the Cats, or just pick a new damn nickname. Like, nobody said they had to be the Tigers or the Cats. They could have been something else. Like, don't give me this bullshit, we have to go Tiger Cats. You could have just been something else.
Well, I know that this really chaps you, but I actually did some cursory research this past week and found...
Don't you bring facts into this podcast.
I found the origin of the Tiger Cats, and it's actually a fairly simple origin.
Okay.
There were two Hamilton football teams that coexisted. One was the Hamilton Tigers, and the other was the Hamilton Flying Wildcats.
Ah.
The Flying Wildcats were born during the Second World War, and a lot of the football team was comprised of members of the Canadian Royal Air Force.
Ooh.
So that's when the league wasn't officially formed until 1958, the CFL, but in about 1950, when they started to do unofficial league play, the two teams merged and became the Tiger Cats. And I assume that that's why the Tiger, if you look at, there's a couple of different logos for the Tiger Cats, but if you look at it, it looks like it's got its, its arms spread like it's leaping or flying, and I think that may have something to do with why it looks like that. But that's where the Tiger Cats come from. Love them or hate them. That's what I found out. So that'll help you maybe in one of your trivia games in the future.
Yeah, I was going to say that'll definitely. I was going to say that'll definitely be a helpful trivia answer. And I actually was formulating a theory as you were saying that. So really, what happened here is that we had a little bit of a combination, but I'm guessing that maybe they didn't want to upset one side or the other, so they just combined the names. And would that be sort of indicative of the Canadian spirit? They're too damn nice to get anything productive done. That's what I'm going with there.
That's the stereotype, as I know. But
let's just keep them both, eh?
They do leave the doors unlocked.
Is that by the way, is that appropriating Canadian culture? Is that where we're at in society? Let's keep them both, eh?
I don't want to offend anybody.
I do. I can offend people. People don't need to like me.
You're in a mood.
Right. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyways, now that we've officially teased the Bombers at Ticats and talked about something else for 5 minutes, let's actually do the analysis. I'm going to shut the hell up. You tell people what happened.
Okay, well, it was Bombers 28, Ticats 24. And although the game sounds like it was close, the Bombers went way out in front in this one. And another week, another questionable performance by Jeremiah Masoli. And I put in the notes here that he's like a box of chocolates. You just don't know what you're going to get with him. And a lot of people that are following CFL for the first time this year say, he had 379 yards and he threw 70% completions. In the CFL, 70% completions is very standard for a good quarterback. But he did have 3 fumbles and 2 interceptions as well. It was kind of sort of garbage time in the third quarter. Nobody scored in the fourth quarter in this game. Steve, as far as on the Hamilton side of the ball, Luke Tasker and Andy Fantuz had very good games. And Brandon Banks, of course, that I have highly recommended every week, had a 120-yard TD return on a missed field goal. How do you like them apples? And he had 238 return yards in this game, which is pretty amazing. He really didn't get much in the offense, but he certainly made up for it. And he's still priced fairly reasonable. I think this week he's 6,600, so I look to use him when I can. And on the Bomber side of the ball, the defense finally looked decent. I said in the first week that I thought the Bombers were a playoff potential team, and I thought they were going in the right direction, and then they came out totally flat in week 1, and they're starting to look better. And they were able to capitalize on turnovers, and that took the pressure totally off the offense. And Weston Dressler was back for Winnipeg, and he looked okay. But Jace Davis, who I haven't really talked about this year, really impressed me most. He made the most big plays, I think, in this game. So I think that's a guy that's going to get important looks going forward. Drew Willie had kind of an average day. I'm not even sure he hit 300 yards in this one. If he did, it was awful close to 300. But I think he only had 1 touchdown. I think the Winnipeg defense has improved, and that's something you should take away going forward here. And I think that's pretty much it for this game. Masoli's going to play again next week. Zach Claros is on his way back, and that's going to change Hamilton's fortunes when he does get back. He's off the injured list now, but he's not ready to play yet. So that's about it for that game.
All right. Well, that takes us over to the next contest, the Argos versus the BC Lions, two names that I can definitely get behind. So I'm a little more acquiesced. Is it acquiesced? I don't even know how the fuck to pronounce it, but I'm a little better with this one. Go ahead.
Okay, well, this game went a lot like I thought it would, although I bet the Argos +7. I waited till game day, and the line moved. I think it started out at 6, and it ended up with Toronto +7. So I hopped on that, and Toronto actually won outright. I said last week that I thought the BC defense special teams was due for kind of a regression to the mean, and they certainly did this week. They did get some pressure on the quarterback, but miscues by the BC offense led to points from the Argos. And once the Argos got ahead, that's where the game really turned. So first, let me talk a little bit about the BC offense. Jonathan Jennings had a really poor game at quarterback, and he did get a rushing TD at the goal line, which I said in week 1 that's what he was going to do, and it finally happened 2 weeks too late for me. But he got pulled in the third quarter for Travis Lulay, who is a former Grey Cup MVP, but he's 34, 35 years old, and he's the mentor to Jonathan Jennings. So I'm worried about a quarterback controversy developing. As we record this podcast, it's been announced that Jennings is going to start this week going forward, but I want to stay away from that because I'm worried he might have a quick hook. But on Toronto's side of the ball, the real important thing to take away from this game is Brandon Whitaker and the Toronto running game. They had been pretty much dead last in rushing in the league. And what happened was when the Argos got a touchdown lead, they really started to mix up the short passing game and the running game. And Brandon Whitaker started to get a lot of touches. And he ended up with 97 yards rushing, but he also had some receptions. And they were able to control the ball, and that led to a lower scoring game. But Toronto exhibited a very, very solid ball control offense. And that leads me to believe going forward that when they get the lead, Brandon Whitaker is definitely going to be a play that you want to look to. If you think that this is a team that's going to close out an upcoming game, that's when you want to go for him. Ricky Ray was decent. I think he only had one touchdown there, so not a great game. But he did have a touchdown to Torrey Gurley, who I touted pretty much every week as well.
Yeah.
He finally got that. Throw it in the end zone, and I'll jump over the defensive back and catch a touchdown that I had been waiting for since week 1. And I expect him to get more looks like that as the season goes forward. He had 10, 11 touchdowns last year. He's just based on the law of averages, he's going to have that big game at some point. But the passing game was pretty spread around. And that's, that I said this is another example of parity league game. You had the 2-0 BC Lions at home, and then the 1-1 who, barely beat Saskatchewan Argos.
That's just, don't worry, that's just me being a great host and making sure my alarm goes off in the middle of the podcast. So, apologize for that.
That's all right. So, we are, after that's pretty much for the Thursday games, and then we move on to the Friday games, which were both barn burners.
All right.
And we've got the Stampeders at the Ottawa Red Blacks, and this is definitely a game worth talking about.
I was going to say, now hold on there one damn minute. The only usefulness I have on this podcast is introducing the games. If you take that away from me, why am I even here? Stamps at Red Blacks. Tell us about this one, John.
Okay. We had a tie.
You're going to have to explain to the Americans how that happens, because that's just downright communist, if you ask me. That's nonsense.
First of all, this was, even though it was a tie, I consider it a bad beat for me because I had bet on the Red Blacks. The game was a pick'em originally. I think it ended up Red Blacks -1 or -1.5, and God help you people that bet the Red Blacks -1. I certainly hope he didn't jump off a bridge. But Ottawa blew this game in multiple ways. The game was a tie, but Ottawa should have won this game. They had very bad field goal kicking, and again, I will point out, as long as people listen to this podcast, that kickers should matter in DFS, but they don't. And they had some really crucial plays go against them, including fumbling at the 1 yard line on 1st and goal with a very short time left in the fourth quarter. So I really think Ottawa should have closed this game out. They didn't, but they didn't let Calgary beat them either. Now, if we're going to talk about the Ottawa Red Blacks offense, I'm just going to say Chris Williams and Chris Williams and Chris Williams and Chris Williams.
How many times do you want to say that name? You can just go ad nauseum, right? Is that how that works?
You just can't fade the guy. He put up another 40-plus DraftKings points this week. I asked some of the people that do interact with me on Twitter, I asked if they thought there is a team in the league that has a defense that can stop this guy, and they pretty much all said no. So the public opinion, the Barstool pundits, whatever you want to call them, is that this guy cannot be stopped. And the issue we'll talk about when their upcoming game, but his price went up about $700. I think he's like $11,000 now. And if he puts up another 41 points this week, that's almost 4 times value. That's insane. He is incredibly underpriced if he at this rate. I mean, he's on rate for a historic record-breaking season that's never been done before. And obviously, at some point, he's going to have a clunker. But
so just to clarify, though, for people who are new to the Canadian Football League, this isn't just business as usual. Like, this is actually an anomaly within the CFL itself.
Well, he's on pace to score 36 touchdowns this season. That would easily break a record. And it's a sheer, it's literal numbers game here because you have 6 regular receiving options on every team. And for him to get 36 touchdowns, would just be unbelievable. I don't even know what the NFL record for touchdowns in the season was.
Wasn't that LaDainian Tomlinson, I think?
Maybe he has it now. I remember back in the 80s, aging myself, of course.
I got my friend Rich here in my office actually right now. Rich, who set the record in the NFL for the most touchdowns ever? Was that LaDainian Tomlinson?
It sounds like LaDainian Tomlinson.
Yeah, he says it sounds like LaDainian Tomlinson. Anyways, please continue. Go right ahead.
But my point, I remember Joe Morris at one point had the record with 21 touchdowns in a season for the Giants. And, we're talking about 36 receiving touchdowns. Some guys don't get 36 in a year, or career, much less a year.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't think at the price, to move on with the reviews, I don't think at this price that you can fade him going forward. He should be at least 13,000, if not more. And because his worst performance this season is 37 DraftKings points. That's still 3.5 times value at 11,000. It's just too low. Greg Ellingson had a good game for Ottawa. I played Sinopoli instead. He usually plays on the opposite side of Chris Williams at the line of scrimmage. So I thought he would get the most looks after Chris Williams, but Ellingson got more. So that hurt me a little bit. They're basically the same price, and if I had Ellingson in my cash games, I probably could have done even better. Anyway, it's kind of a toss-up there. Running game is a total question mark for Ottawa going forward. They have Nick Grigsby, who was hired from a Kia dealership in Florida off the street. Not a joke. You'll see a lot of tweets about that if you search CFL. But he has a history of fumbling a lot. And he coughed up a big one on the 1 yard line with about, I want to say, like 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. It was in the last 3 minutes of the game, and that would have put the game away for Ottawa. So that was really tough. Calgary was able to kick the ball out or move the ball out without having to take a safety. So it ended up going to overtime because of that. But he has a history of fumbling, so a lot of people are going to be on him this week. Oh, Nick Grigsby's a great value. I don't think he's a great value because I'm not. I would actually take his partner Keenan LaFrance. He looked better. He looked better running the ball. So we'll see going forward. But on the Calgary side of the ball, Bo Levi Mitchell had another great game manager game. He doesn't make mistakes. Calgary took a lot of bad penalties.
Is he the Alex Smith of the CFL?
Well, he is. The thing is, I've always wanted him to get an NFL tryout, and he signed long-term with Calgary. And for those of you not aware, the CFL has a salary cap of 5.1 million Canadian dollars per team. So like a superstar in the CFL might make $500,000 a year. I'm not sure what the minimum salary in the NFL is, but it's probably pretty close to that, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say the practice squad guys are probably making comparable money to that.
Yeah, so, and that's Canadian, not American dollars, you got to realize. So this guy's 6'4", and he has a decent arm, and he's been in the league, I think, 3-4 years now, and he's won a Grey Cup, and he's got a NFL quarterback body. I'm a suffering Bills fan, and they haven't had a good quarterback in 20 years. So I would love for him to get a tryout with the Bills, He would be a lot cheaper option than, the $20 million they want to pay Tyrod Taylor. Anyway, right. He doesn't make many bad mistakes. He gets out of bounds. He throws the ball away. He doesn't cause a lot of turnovers. Joe West was in line for a great game. He's the one getting the most looks in the Calgary passing game. Got hurt and then came back in the last half of the fourth quarter. No, I'm sorry. He came back in overtime. Caught a couple of passes. I am still extremely scratching my head about Calgary's usage of Jerome Messam, the 6'5" running back that they have. I don't know if it's a conditioning thing or the coaches. He doesn't like the coaches or the coaches don't like him, but he's only being used about half the time. And it seems he also gets used more in that ball control. We have the lead type of thing. So you have to look at games where they're a heavy favorite that he might be worth playing more. And as I said, Calgary gave up too many penalties in this game. It was a little frustrating to see it end in a tie, but that's just the way it went.
You Canadians love your ties. Hockey, Canadian Football League, man, it's just...
Actually, there's no more ties in hockey anymore.
Oh, there aren't. That shows you my knowledge. I don't follow hockey either. So when did that change?
It changed several years ago. Actually, they went from they had a 5-minute overtime that would end in a tie if nobody scored, but then they went to the shootout. So they have 5-minute overtime, and then they'll have a shootout. And actually, the overtime is 4-on-4 instead of 5-on-5 skaters. So there's more likely more open ice, so there's more offensive chances. Anyway, that's another podcast for another day.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, on that note, let's take it to the last game from last week. The Rough Riders taking on the Eskimos. This one also an OT game. No tie, though, which is much better in my opinion, and also extremely high scoring. So give me the breakdown here. 39-36 Eskimos.
Okay, last week we talked about this game being a rivalry game. And I talked about why the coaching staff was hired away.
Right.
And this went exactly like I thought it would go. And we're going to start with the fact that it was the only game of the week to go over the total in the betting side of things. The Eskimos' defense is pretty bad, especially the secondary. And in week one, we saw that Ottawa put up 45 points on them. And I said, we have to see if they do a better job, and they haven't. They had week 2 off, but in week 3 they gave up 39 points. That's a big red flag to me, that the Eskimos have problems on the defensive side of the ball, and that you want to target players playing against the Eskimos going forward. And then I also said that because of the rivalry aspect of this game and the coaching staff facing their old team and players on opposite teams from last year, that this game would be close. And for a while it didn't look like it, but it did end up being close, and the Riders covered easily. I think it ended up being like a 10.5 point spread. I was really looking for like 13 points for me to bet on it, but they easily covered. Now, Eskimos went up, I think, around 14, 15 points early in the second half, and the Rough Riders came back with a lot of aggressive coaching by their coach, the former Eskimos coach. He went for it on third downs. He went for it on third downs when they were in their own end of the field. And then after scoring a touchdown, they did what's called a short kick, which us in America, we like to call those onside kicks. But because of the larger, wider field, it doesn't have to be that ground ball type kick.
Right.
You can do all kinds of pooches and come up with a very wide variety of short kicks. And that's exactly what happened. They kicked it short about 15 yards. The last player to touch it was a Rough Rider player, and it went out of bounds. And so they got to maintain possession. So, and also they had, they scored a touchdown, and then the next possession they punted, and Edmonton fumbled the return, and they got the ball back. So it was just a huge momentum swing, and they were scoring up until the very end of the game, and it tied 36-36 going into overtime. Now this is where it gets interesting. Eskimos scored a field goal. Although they moved the ball, they couldn't get in the end zone. So the Rough Riders had the ball, and they start on the 35-yard line. It's third in literal inches, like less than 6 inches from the 25.5-yard line. They got to get to the 25-yard line to get a first down. So they could kick a field goal to tie it and send it into the second round of overtime, or they could go for the first down. And the coach has been aggressive all game, went for the first down. They did not get it, and that ended the game. So they went aggressive, and then it finally bit them in the end. But you have to admire them for not giving up and seizing momentum like that.
Isn't that kind of what you talked about, too, over the course of these podcasts? Is in the CFL, you're going to find a lot more aggressive strategy than you generally will in the NFL.
Yes, you will. And you'll find a lot more, there in the NFL, you have the coaches by the book. And then you also have the analytics by the book, like for using a very bad example, the fourth down bot on the New York Times, page, when you should go for it, when you should kick a field goal, when you should, whatever, punt. But there's people that are in those camps. They're in the coach's camp, play not to lose, play to win. And myself, I think because there was another round of overtime, at that point, I would have kicked the field goal. Hindsight's obviously 20/20, but the Rough Riders, I said it after their week 1 game, their week 2 game, which was their first game, that they had trouble moving the ball in short yardage situations, and that was an issue going forward. So that screamed to me, they don't have a play for this, so they don't have a good enough play for this. Anyway. On to the individual performances. On the Edmonton side of the ball, Chris Getzlaff, who was a former Saskatchewan Rough Rider, caught a TD pass versus his former team. And Adarius Bowman was Studley, had 3 touchdown passes. He had 41 points. He was like 3 points behind Chris Williams, 44. He was the second highest scorer of the week. John White, at the running back, had a very productive game, and he had 20 points, 20 and change. Mike Riley ended up the top scoring quarterback in week 3, but I think that was only because the game went to overtime. But the 2 overtime quarterbacks, Trevor Harris and Mike Riley, were the 2 biggest scorers in week 3. On the Saskatchewan side of the ball, John Childs and the running back Steele were very good, and I think their options going forward at their prices. Ricky Collins was actually the big performer at wide receiver. Namon Roosevelt was kind of shut down by Edmonton, but this Ricky Collins fellow, he made a bunch of big plays, especially in the second half. I think he had like 6 catches, 115 yards, and a touchdown. So that was a huge fantasy day, and he's still cheap. I think he's like 4,100 on DraftKings right now. So that's somebody to look at going forward. Depending, and again, now that like these guys are options, this guy's an option, that guy's an option. Now you look for the matchups. That's what it comes down to. That's the next step.
Right.
And So that's it for the reviews this week. There's a lot to talk about going forward, but this is the part of the podcast where we usually take a pause, and instead of going right into the upcoming games, we'll talk about something else.
Well, we'll talk about something else's actually, because this is also going to be where I tell all of the good folks who are listening right now about rosters.com. Rosters.com, full disclosure, does not have daily fantasy CFL. DraftKings is the only one that has that, and Rosters is in full support of all of you who want to play daily fantasy CFL at DraftKings. So, by all means, don't think that there's any sort of turf war going on here. But Rosters does also have a phenomenal deal for all of you if you're looking to play some Major League Baseball, or if that's not your thing and you're just kind of waiting it out until the NFL, NHL, NBA season starts. You'll definitely have this deal in your back pocket waiting for you. And you might as well just sign up now, because you never know when a deal is going to go away. Now, the deal that I'm talking about, if you sign up using promo code CRAZY, yes, that is related to me, Crazy Gaby. You sign up using promo code CRAZY, you deposit $20, and they're actually going to give you $20 absolutely free. Now, this isn't like the deposit bonuses you're used to seeing, and maybe $20 doesn't sound super sexy, right? Because you got all these other sites going, deposit $600 and we'll match you 100% up to $600. Well, they're not really telling the truth, because you have to play basically enough to pay off your house before you're able to even access that money, or a fraction of that money. At Rosters, you deposit $20, nice, safe, easy amount. Everybody's got $20 laying around. They credit you $20 absolutely free. You can use it right away to enter contests. If you wanted to play Major League Baseball on Friday when it comes back from the All-Star break, boom, $40 in entry fees right there. Or, like I said, save it until the fall. You got, obviously you got football, you got basketball, you got NHL, and all that good stuff. So, want to thank all the folks at Rosters.com for making this deal possible. And we also have a podcast with the CEO of Rosters.com, Gabe Hunterton. He actually used to manage the third largest casino in the world out in Macau, China. A very interesting man, very interesting story when you hear about kind of what his life experiences have been. So I urge you all to sign up using promo code CRAZY, deposit $20, get free $20, and also listen to that podcast. If you have a chance, you can go to fearthebeardmedia.com to check it out, or check out the Pianos Hate podcasts stream on iTunes, Google Play, etc. That is my personal podcast stream. John, as you mentioned, we are going to talk about something else related to CFL as well, and that would be the couple of tips and tricks you've listed for folks when they're actually watching the game. So I see you've got 3 of them here. Why don't you go ahead and tell folks which coaches go for it the most on third down and why that matters?
Okay. Well, what I wanted to do today, since I talked about stats last week and just rattled off like number formulas or whatever that,
right.
I said every week so far that I think watching the games gives you the best insight for your time. So if you are a time-pressed individual and you want to get into CFL Daily Fantasy, go to the CFL website or go to YouTube and watch the games. Now, last year they did a much better job than this year of condensing the games. They used to have 10-minute versions of a condensed game where they would have all the big plays. And they did a really great job editing that. And you might have to watch a couple of clips to see all the important things this year of certain games. But so what I decided to do today is talk about tips for watching the games. And you're right, the first one that people would want to make these notes to themselves while they're watching the game. And the first one is which coaches go for it the most on third down. And why this is important. If you watch a game between Toronto and Ottawa, which is coming up tomorrow, you look at which one goes for it more on third down. What this means for your fantasy team is that they're going to get more plays for the offensive personnel. Number one, because on that play they're not kicking the ball. And number two, hopefully a longer drive because they converted the third down. And all of that is going to increase your fantasy score. So you may look for matchups for teams that, even if they're not favored to win a game, they may go for it more often, and that may mean more yardage for their prospective individual matchups. And so we'll move on to the second one, which is the pass rush and sacks. Sacks are only worth 1 point. in daily fantasy.
Now, real quick, do you think that the defensive scoring so far has been good, or would you make some changes? Just in case, CFL's small enough, especially the content world, there's a good chance some people from DraftKings or some people who might have influence do listen to this podcast. So what do you think about the defensive scoring so far?
Okay, the one element that I would immediately change is the points allowed element, because it's basically just exactly copied from the NFL. It's the same point system. And you can tell after a few weeks, most of you that watch these games, that these games are much higher scoring than
right.
NFL games. As someone who suffered through many a Buffalo Bills 17-13 loss, this is not your mama's NFL. Here, this is the CFL.
You leave my mother out of it.
But watching the pass rush and keeping track of sacks, although it's not a huge point impact, teams with a good pass rush will take away passing stats from the offense. If somebody has a good matchup for getting passing yards or getting receptions, it might not show up in the box score, but if they're getting a really good pass rush on the quarterback, they're going to, there's going to result in misses, drops or misses, or holding penalties that take away plays. So the quarterbacks might be like, again, with Masoli last week, he was super efficient. He was like 29 of 39 for 379 yards, but he had 5 turnovers,
Yeah.
They got a rush on him. That's what happened. He looked efficient in the box score, but if you watch the game, you know that he had a bad game. And then finally, one that's very important is which special teams are least penalized on kick returns. Because if you have a team that on their punt and their kick return team do not get penalized, you always see that block in the back, illegal block, down the field too soon, those types of penalties. Or well, actually on the return side is what we really want to talk about, but block in the back, illegal block, holding type of things.
Yeah.
This means your preferred kick returner is always going to be more reliable to get the return yards that you project that he's going to get. So if I have Brandon Banks and they're never holding on his returns, then he's going to rack up the yardage that I expect him to rack up. It's nothing worse than you see somebody like Rainey from British Columbia, rip off a 60-yard return and it's brought back by a holding penalty. So that's something that, the stats are not going to tell you. I mean, you're going to see penalties in the box score, but it's something that these stat sheets that people are putting out, whether they're free or not, are not going to tell you. So again, I'm trying to help people be as efficient as possible in watching games or watching highlights and be able to glean information that's going to help them pick their teams.
Absolutely. And by the way, you don't need to say it. Of course, you can stay humble. I'm going to say it. All right. I'm going to say it. You said, people making people pay for this information. That listen, we know who's listening right now. We know where some information came from because it wasn't in the space before John decided to put it out there. And listen, nobody's asking for intellectual property rights or your firstborn or anything along those lines, but a simple acknowledgement would go a long way. I'm a big proponent of if somebody teaches you something, the very least you can do is, doesn't even have to be within the content itself. Give a shout out on Twitter. Go ahead and retweet the actual content itself to let people know and become aware that you also consume this content. Just some practices out there that I definitely think are subpar and pretty slimy. I'm going to leave it at that. John, you don't have to comment on it. We're going to keep you above all of it. Is that what people say? We're going to keep you above it all.
I'm a pretty hefty guy. I don't know if you want to.
I'll go down in the trenches and I'll fight for it. You can go ahead and stay there and keep clean.
I'll defer comment at this time.
There you go. Your lawyers have advised you not to speak about this matter. All right, let's get into the previews for the upcoming week. Ottawa at Toronto is trying to combine the two cities there. Looks like it's a pick'em, and it's a 52.5 total. So what's going on there?
Well, by the way, I put that in the notes, and those were yesterday's. I noticed the lines for the games moving a lot this week, and I wonder if that has anything to do with no baseball games. And
people getting a little antsy about not having anything to wager on.
I really believe that's the case. Believe it or not, the lines usually don't move significantly until about 24 hours before the game because that's when the depth charts come out. And they were moving pretty heavily yesterday, and I was like, geez, people just got to have action on something. But as you mentioned, this game is a pick-em, and the Red Blacks doing their Rodney Dangerfield, they get no respect. They tied last week, but they're still undefeated. And consider me converted. I said this in the review. You can't fade Chris Williams any longer until he has a bad game. And I don't think you can fade him at this price. $11,000, again, for a projection, an average of 41 points a game.
Now, is this a failure on DraftKings' part, you think, in terms of salary, or is this just kind of what it is right now? It's reasonable. He's just that damn good at the moment.
Well, he went up 700 points, and he's far and away the highest scoring player in the league by about 10 points a game. So I just think he's underpriced in comparison to everybody else. I mean, there's guys that are, scoring 10 points less a game than him that are, the same price, like Trevor Harris, the quarterback for Ottawa. He's 11-1, I think. Anyway, I am disappointed with DraftKings, although I have to admit it is harder to pick an all-stud lineup right now than it has been in the past weeks. It's still, it's been a long time since I've been involved in a daily fantasy scenario where one player was just destroying the leagues from a statistics standpoint.
You must not have been playing NBA daily fantasy the last couple of seasons.
No, I really don't play NBA fantasy very much at all. But
because Russell Westbrook, whenever Kevin Durant is out, I was going to say Russell Westbrook, whenever Kevin Durant is out, he's pretty much just a must play along those same lines. Like you just guaranteed like 4 of 50 fantasy points.
I've seen him take a lot of shots.
Yeah.
I remember when I played fantasy NASCAR very heavily, and back in the day before we had the DraftKings version, we had the Fantasy Sports Live version, and Kyle Busch dominated. I mean, he's had some dominant seasons in between when there wasn't. There was a few years where there wasn't any fantasy NASCAR, daily fantasy NASCAR, but that was kind of a thing where just no matter where they priced him, you had to take him. So, not to get bogged down in a pricing discussion, in this game we have Ottawa at Toronto pick'em. I like Ottawa. I think they're not getting respect here. Toronto is improved, but again, a parity league. All things considered, Ottawa. As a pick'em, you got to think they're the favorite in this game. I would also lean over in this game because we know Toronto defensively has had trouble holding teams to low-scoring games, although they only allowed 14 points last week. People definitely have recency bias in the NFL. The Argos will, like I said before, they'll try to, if they get the lead, they will try to go ball control offense and do a lot of short passes and runs, and that will help keep the score down. But, boy, I don't know if people do live betting or if you even can on CFL. I really don't do any live betting. If Ottawa gets out to a 2-score lead real quickly, then this thing is going to go way over, I think. I like Ottawa so much because they're healthy, and other than the question mark in their running game, otherwise they're completely healthy. And they have Henry Burris and Trevor Harris, so they have no issues at quarterback if there's a quarterback injury. I would take Ottawa plus the points versus any team in the league right now until somebody proves they can shut down Chris Williams, even just Chris Williams. If they can show that they can shut him down, I would take Ottawa every week. I mean, like, it would be reasonable to see them go 14-4 on the season, maybe 15-3. Obviously, they're going to lose a couple of games, but if they're getting points, how can you not? How can you not take them right now? I just don't. They need to shake off the fumble issues. If I see Grigsby handling the majority of the balls, I'll be a little bit nervous. But if they don't turn the ball over in the running game, I like Ottawa to win this game. I think Ricky Ray is a huge value play this week at quarterback. Ottawa defense, I haven't seen them really put a lot of pass rush pressure on people. They certainly didn't really get it on Bo Levi Mitchell. So I think Ricky Ray is a very good pick this week, and I like Keenan LaFrance as the running back for Ottawa. I think that he's a sneakier play this week than Nick Grigsby. I think all the touts are going to be on Nick Grigsby, so I would take LaFrance instead. And he's cheap, 4,000. So,
does he enable Does he enable like the big stud lineup then that you were kind of alluding to earlier? If you take him instead as well.
Well, yeah. There's a couple of cheap plays this week, and he to me is the cheap running back play. He's 4,000. He's a running back. There are a couple other options at running back. Otherwise, you have to go stud. I actually put together, because this week, and I'll talk about this before we end the podcast, but this week there's a fairly large tournament on DraftKings. So I put together 3 lineups, 1 cash and 2 GPPs, because of the pricing dynamic this week, you're able to put some very interesting combinations together. And it's getting tougher to put straight chalk teams together, so that's good. It's good for the game overall, and it's good for those of us that like to talk about it as well. So let's move on to the next one.
All right, I like how you kind of gave me some runway there too. You could have just said the names of the teams, but you let me do my thing, and I appreciate that, John. Edmonton,
I'm learning on the job.
Edmonton at Winnipeg. Winnipeg is +3 in this one, 53-point total. Let me know.
Well, okay, both teams had a bounce-back game from last week. Edmonton had the week off in week 2, but they lost to Ottawa in week 1, and then they came back and beat Saskatchewan in week 2. But both of those games are home, and now they're going on the road, and they're playing Winnipeg, who had a huge bounce-back game against Hamilton, but they only scored 28 points, and their defense scored some points in that game. However, you have to like this matchup for Winnipeg Blue Bombers.
Yeah,
Edmonton's played 2 games at home, and they've given up 45 and 36 points. So you have to think that Winnipeg is going to score some points in this game. Drew Willie, like I said, he had a decent game last week, but he's got a super matchup. He's 9,000 on DraftKings. I think he's priced really high for what you're going to get out of him. But I think on the Winnipeg side of the ball, obviously Andrew Harris. This matchup, he's the number 1 rated running back this week. But the value plays for Winnipeg that I like are Jace Davis, their wide receiver, who's kind of their number 3 guy, but he made some big plays last week, and he's either 4,300 on DraftKings. And he had a very impressive game last week. He had a touchdown. I like him this week. And Quentin McDuffie is their kick returner, and he is only 3,900. So if you think there's going to be a lot of returns in this game, you might want to play him for the return yardage. If you don't, you think there's going to be a lot of touchdowns scored and not a lot of punting, he may still get the return yards on kickoffs, but that's up to you to decide if you want to use him. On the Edmonton side of the ball, it's really hard to fade Mike Riley, who was the highest scoring quarterback last week, or Adarius Bowman and Darrell Walker. I like Bowman because he's bigger than Walker. They're both great receivers, and either one of them could go off. Obviously, last week, Bowman had the 3 touchdowns. He went off for 40-plus points. The Eskimo return game is a question mark this week. They just announced who the return guy was going to be right before we recorded this, and the guy is not in the DraftKings player pool, so not an issue there. And you have to lean on the over here, but if Winnipeg's defense keeps improving, or if Winnipeg keeps improving overall, I like taking them plus the points at home. Take the home dog. That's my opinion. That's not my official play. As I always say, my official plays are posted on my Twitter page.
Yep.
But of the 2 we've talked about so far, I really like Ottawa tomorrow night so far as a pick 'em. All right, we're halfway through.
Hamilton at Montreal. Montreal -1, 48-point total, so a little bit of a lower total here. Is this a game that we need to stay away from because of that?
Well, from a daily fantasy perspective, I'm going to say short answer, yes.
Okay.
Long answer is there's certain players that you're going to want to take, but This game has tremendous uncertainty. And why do it have tremendous uncertainty? Well, we have Jeremiah Masoli on the Hamilton side of the ball. As I said, he's a box of chocolates. And on the Montreal side of the ball, you have Kevin Glenn not starting due to some pink eye type of issue.
He's got pink eye?
He has eye inflammation.
I laugh, but conjunctivitis is actually a bitch. I've had it before. It's no joke.
Yes. So Rakeem Cato is going to start for Montreal. And he is better than an average backup in the CFL. He started, I want to say, 4 or 5 games for Montreal last year. He's not horrible. But his ceiling, I do not think, is high as Kevin Glenn's ceiling. So Rakeem Cato is only 6,300 on DraftKings. That's the quarterback option. If you want to fit studs in your other spots, you play Rakeem Cato at quarterback. That's where you're going to be able to fit Chris Williams and Adarius Bowman and all the other studs in that you want. Personally, I don't think you can punt your quarterback in cash games. But for a GPP lineup, I'm willing to take one flyer on Rakeem Cato. So that's something. Now, another piece of information that I didn't know when I wrote these notes that I know now is that Duron Carter, although he was suspended, is appealed. So he will be able to play. He didn't get a lot of practice this week. Who knows what the chemistry of this Montreal team is going to be like on offense. I say stay away. That's my personal opinion, is stay away. I like Hamilton to win this game, but this game I think is due for a definite under. And you ask why? Well, Montreal's defense is not bad. I don't see them giving up, maybe 32 max for Hamilton, and that's if, say, Brandon Banks gets a return touchdown.
Right.
Montreal has a fairly good defense, and if their offense is a total stink bomb, they'll be lucky to put up 16 points, and there's your 48 right there. So if that somehow gets bet up to 50, the total moves because everybody's degenning it up because there's no baseball, I might hop on the under there. It's not where I want it to be right now, but as far as DFS goes, all the usual suspects are in play for Hamilton. You got to like Brandon Banks. You got to like Andy Fantuz. You got to like Luke Tasker. Tyquan Underwood is cheap at 4,000, but it seemed to me like he dropped a lot of balls. All these people with their stats, their stat sheets and stuff that they put out for DFS, nobody has drops. They have targets, and then they go, oh, you can take targets and then subtract catches. But there are times when quarterback overthrows them on the target, and that's not a drop.
Right.
Tyquan Underwood has dropped a lot of balls.
And that's something where, to your defense, by the way, the eye test really comes into play, where you said if you want to get good, stats aren't going to help you as much in CFL as other sports. You need to watch the damn games. Yeah,
so that's, and that also, in that same vein, is the situational. Who, if it's third and inches on the 55-yard line, or if it's third and inches on the 1-yard line, who's on the field? It makes a huge difference as far as fantasy goes. And that's something that the depth chart doesn't really tell you, but if you watch the game, So I like, as far as betting goes in this game, I said I like the under, but I would take the Ticats +3 all day in this game. As a pick'em, I lean Hamilton, but if for some reason people start betting it towards Montreal, I don't know why they would, maybe because Duron Carter's playing, and Hamilton gets up to +3, I would hop all over that. Ken Austin, the coach for Hamilton, is one of the better coaches in the league, and Jim Pop, the coach for Montreal, is not. And Austin won't be outcoached in this situation. So,
how often, by the way, does coaching turnover happen in the CFL comparative to other sports like the NFL?
Well, it's funny you say that because Saskatchewan Roughriders were they started the season projected to be a playoff team, and they ended up 3-15 on the year, and they started out 0-9 or 1-8, 0-9. They didn't win a game till like their 8th game of the year, and people were calling for the firing of the coaches, after the 3rd game, after the 4th game, after the 5th game, and they finally pulled the trigger, at like the 9th game of the year, and it doesn't happen that quickly. Owners are not, front office / owners are not that. It's tough to bring a better coach in the middle of the year. That's the problem.
Right.
You need somebody that knows the CFL system and can jump right in, and make something happened. So it doesn't happen that often, and coaching matters more than people think.
All right. Well, does that mean we can head over to the next contest, or did you have a few more thoughts on this one you wanted to give?
No, I think we're done.
All right. Last game then, BC at Saskatchewan, minus 1.5 for Saskatchewan and a 50-point total. Let me have it here.
Okay, well, the first Riders game was in week 2, and I said after that game they looked like they were still in preseason mode. And last week, although they played Edmonton, who has been the worst scoring defense in the league, they looked like they were out of preseason mode. They kind of lulled into a 14-point deficit, and then they finally just woke up, and they were able to run and to pass and move the ball and get momentum away from Edmonton. And this week they are facing a much better defense in British Columbia. So it's a real test to see if they've improved or they wallow back into a 14 to 17 point performance. They scored 17 at home against Toronto. So this is kind of not, it's just to see if they've moved the bar a little bit, so to speak. As far as Saskatchewan options, I like the value picks. Durant is quarterback is 9,000 and change or 9,000 even. I'm not sure which. Too expensive. I said after week 2 that he was not able to really rush the ball himself very much. His mobility seems to be very limited. He can still throw the ball very well, but I don't think I think I'd rather have Ricky Ray because it's about $500 or $800 cheaper than him, even because they're both giving you the same amount of rushing yards.
Right.
Naman Roosevelt, I still like him to have a good year. I don't like he got shut out by Edmonton. Not shut out, but they were forced to look in other directions. So I like going with the value plays for Saskatchewan, and those are running back Steele and 2 wide receivers, Chambers and Collins. Ricky Collins had the big day. He's 4,100, and Chambers is 3,800. If this game gets into a passing situation for Saskatchewan where maybe they get down a couple touchdowns and they have to throw the ball more, look for those guys to put up value for their dollars. So I like Collins myself of the 3, but they all have potential. So, and then on the other side of the ball, British Columbia, the question mark at quarterback, it really has me staying away from them in a lot of ways this game. If Lule they've announced that Jonathan Jennings is going to start. If Lule plays, he's more likely to, I think, makes the receivers a lot more attractive. But none of the receivers are really cheap enough. I think Sean Gore is 5,000 on DraftKings. Not cheap enough for me to take a chance on him this week. I think it's a pass. And the running game, it's a question mark. Nobody has enough data on which running back is going to play the most, if Rainey's going to get into the offense, if Anthony Allen's going to have another big game like he did last week. I think there's just too much question marks there for me to take anybody on the BC side of the ball this week, so I'm fading them pretty much all across the board, and hopefully that doesn't bite me in the ass. But as far as the betting goes here, I kind of like Saskatchewan to win this game. I think whichever team gets a field goal or more in the point spread, I would consider. I think this is a pretty even matchup. I like Saskatchewan at home. They have a good home field advantage. If this game creeped up to 52 or 53 in the total, I would definitely go under here because BC has a good defense. Saskatchewan, more of a question mark on defense, but the fact that BC has so many question marks on offense leads me to believe this game is going to go under. So that's why I'm more than one reason why I'm staying away from this game from a fantasy perspective.
There you have it. And John, before we sign off here, I wanted to get your unofficial off-the-record opinion. I say that because I want to make sure we're all legally covered here. if folks are looking to bet on some CFL, they want to play some daily fantasy CFL, and they also they're hearing what you're saying about people being a little bit bored because of the baseball break, who are maybe affecting these lines in some ways that would be advantageous for a sharp bettor. Where can they do that? What's the best website out there?
Well, if you're talking about daily fantasy sports, I think you have to go to DraftKings.
Sure. You know what I'm talking about, though. I'm not talking about daily fantasy sports. Is there a website that might be okay for people who are looking at doing some of this? And it's completely up to them. We take no responsibility for anything they choose to do.
I will be 100% honest and say that I like to wager on CFL games, and I will also be 100% honest and say I live in New York State, and so because of that, I can only use virtual currencies to wager on games, and that is something that I do. And of all the sites that accept virtual currency to wager on CFL, the one I like to use is called Nitrogen Sports.
Nitrogen Sports. Okay, that's all I was getting at.
I believe that's a .eu domain. Don't quote me on that. They're on Twitter as Nitrogen Sports, but I've been using that site for a long time. I want to say 3 to 4 years, probably 3 years in the current version, but they had a version 1 before that. Never felt that's one of the beautiful aspects of virtual currency, aka Bitcoin. It's my preferred virtual currency, is that you do have to worry, as with any offshore operation, you have to worry about getting paid, but you never have to worry about keeping money on a site, somebody else's website. You can instantly deposit and wager your wager, and then as soon as the wager's settled, you can instantly withdraw. There are no fees. There's no wait time. It's literally minutes. It's converting your currency into other currencies can be easy or difficult depending where you live, what country you live in, what state in the wonderful United States of America you live in. New York is pretty harsh on virtual currencies. To buy and sell as an individual, they want you to get a certain kind of license to do that, and it's cost prohibitive for somebody like me. But that doesn't mean I can't drive to Massachusetts or Pennsylvania or Ohio and go to a Bitcoin ATM and exchange my Bitcoins for dollars, or do it in an exchange online. A lot of the online Bitcoin exchanges, they say in their terms of service that if you are exchanging gambling winnings, that it's prohibited in their terms of service. So a Bitcoin ATM is kind of the way to go, I think, there. And I know they're all over the place in Canada, so if you go across the border to Ontario, you can do it there as well. But like even in you go to the train station in Boston, the South Bay station there, you get off the train, and there's a whole array of Bitcoin ATMs right there in the train station. It's pretty amazing. So it's very interesting currency. Allows me to enjoy my sports wagering that I like to do, and gets the job done. What else can I say?
I think you said it all, my friend. And on that note, we will end the podcast. John, I want to thank you again for joining and being the voice of knowledge to my ignorance as far as Daily Fantasy CFL is concerned. Remember, you can subscribe to the Daily Fantasy CFL podcast on iTunes, Google Play, any other podcast app you might happen to use. You can check out if you choose to consume this sort of media on YouTube, you can check it out on John's YouTube page, at Buffalo Hold'em, correct?
Well, yeah, it's just Buffalo Hold'em on YouTube.
Yep, Buffalo Hold'em on YouTube. And you can, of course, follow...
Buffalo Hold'em on Twitter.
Yep, you can follow... I'm getting there. You can follow John on Twitter, at Buffalo Hold'em, and ask him your questions. He posts his favorite plays. He posts any sort of betting information that he might like to make available to the public. And if you have a question, just ask. He's more than willing to do so. Possibly to a fault, some might say. And John, I will see you next week, and hopefully we'll have as successful a week 4 as we did for week 3.
All right. We'll see you then. So thanks for listening. Take care.
Howdy, folks. Gabriel Crazy Gaby Harbor here, founder of Fear the Beard Media. Everyone has a little gamble in them, so next time you decide to lay down a few bets, make it worth your while by using this special deal from wagertalk.com. Right now, use promo code CIRCUIT on your first purchase, and you'll receive any one daily package absolutely free, or $40 off any other package of your choice. Wagertalk.com is home to many of the nation's top sports bettors, so if you decide it's time for some action, stop by wagertalk.com first. Again, just enter promo code CIRCUIT on your first purchase, and you'll receive any one daily package absolutely free, or $40 off any other package. Good luck! If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider pledging your support for Fear the Beard Media at patreon.com/Fear the Beard Media. I've got big dreams for the Fear the Beard Media podcast network, but those can't be realized without the support from listeners like yourself. Your support will help us grow the Fear the Beard Media podcast network so we can help more talented broadcasters get their podcasts on the air. I've created some unique and hopefully entertaining reward levels for all of our patrons on Patreon, starting from as low as just $1 of support per month. It would mean the world to all of us if you chose to pledge your support at patreon.com/Fear the Beard Media. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, Google Play, or through any other major podcast directory. Head over to fearthebeardmedia.com and check out all the podcasts on the Fear the Beard Media podcast network. If you're interested in starting a podcast or joining the Fear the Beard Media podcast network with your current podcast, email us at fearthebeardmedia@gmail.com. We'd love to get you on our network, absolutely free, no cost to you. Follow us on Twitter and Snapchat at FearBeardMedia and on Instagram at FearTheBeardMedia. Until next episode, take care.